all children get the chance to succeed, through a further £300 million to schools for tutoring, new summer school initiatives and the COVID premium.
Right, let's head up to Wantage with David Johnson. David Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, it was reported that the Civil Service Fast Stream is no longer publishing data on the social backgrounds of the people it hires, which came with information obtained by FOI that the success of those from private schools entering the Fast Stream is double that of those from comprehensive schools. Can I therefore ask my right honourable friend to push the Civil Service Fast Stream to publish this data on a regular basis so that they are leading by example and demonstrating their commitment to social mobility?
My honourable friend is correct that the civil service should be recruiting people, the best people, regardless of their background, and it should be open to all. We will be publishing the data that he asks for by April of this year, and the government will have more to say shortly on widening opportunity in the civil service.
Further substantive questions, Secretary Truss.
We need to tackle the scourge of geographic inequality. Average hourly wages are nearly 30% higher in London than they are in the North West. And that's why I've asked the Equality Hub to look beyond protected characteristics and identify additional barriers people face up and down the country.
Sent to the North West and visit Mark Menzies. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Coastal communities such as Lytham St Anne's are home to substantial tourism and hospitality sectors, sectors that have traditionally employed large numbers of women, which have been particularly hit by the pandemic. With inequality in coastal resorts a long recognised issue, what plans does my right honourable friend have to ensure that coastal towns, and Lancashire especially, can build back better?
Well, in answer to my honourable friend's question, we are directing vital support to seaside towns through a £230 million Coastal Communities Fund. And we do recognise the unique challenges faced by towns such as St Anne's, and that will be very much in our thoughts as we look to the £4 billion Levelling Up Fund and the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. And I'm pleased to say we'll be publishing perspectives for those shortly, and no doubt my honourable friend will be interested in applying.
Substantive question to Minister Fraser.
Mr. Speaker, tackling race disparity in the criminal justice system remains a priority for all ministers in my department. We have a broad programme of work to address this issue. This includes work on the collection of data, the implementation of policies which tackle disproportionality, together with scrutiny and oversight. The Criminal Justice System Race and Ethnicity Board reviews the progress of this work.
To Janet Davey. Janet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A lack of diversity in the judiciary is something that should concern the government. This is deeply troubling, as it is one of the major reasons all communities, including Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, lack confidence in the criminal justice system. There are currently 0 Supreme Court judges who are from Black, Asian or minority ethnic backgrounds. Steps need to be taken to fix the justice system so that it is fair and equal for everyone. Will the government introduce a clear target for a representative judiciary as called for in the Lamy review?
The honourable member raises a very important issue in relation to diversity in the judiciary, and it's important also to ensure that women and Black and ethnic minorities come through the system as lawyers, and indeed there are a lot of women coming through the system, but we do need to improve that as well. From 2014 to 2019 there have been some small improvements in judicial diversity. The proportion of women judges increased from 24% to 32% in the courts, and 43% to 46% in tribunals. And the proportion of BAME judges increased from 6% to 7% in the courts and 9 to 11% in the tribunals. However, we do need to do more work, but the judiciary is independent, and I know that they're very concerned about this issue.
We have a substantive question to Minister Bednock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Any discrimination against LGBT people is unacceptable, and this government is committed to supporting LGBT people and improving the lives of all citizens. We are working across agencies to ensure that they are safe from violence and discrimination. Internationally, we have awarded £3.2 million of new funding to help Commonwealth governments and civil society repeal outdated discriminatory laws.
Set up to Scotland with Andrew Bowie. Andrew.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Recent findings show an alarming rise in homophobic hate crimes across the United Kingdom from 6,655 in 2014-15 to an astonishing 18,000 just last year. These figures show that despite our best efforts, many people are continuing to suffer discrimination and abuse. So does my honourable friend agree that much more must be done, and what more will her department do to ensure that the United Kingdom can really become a country where facing discrimination on the basis of who you love really is a thing of the past?
Minister.
I do agree with my honourable friend, and firstly I would encourage those who may have been a victim of hate crime to speak out and contact the police. This government is proud to have supported Gallup, the country's leading LGBT anti-violence charity, and we welcome their new specialist hate crime helpline which launched last week. To further ensure the safety of LGBT people in this country and around the world, the government is committed to ending conversion therapy and delivering an international conference.
Another substantive question for you, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the government recognises that it is important that the tax system treats people fairly and consistently, whilst also raising revenue for public services. We provide tax-free welfare benefits for those who have extra costs associated with their disability, including disability living allowance, personal independence payment, and attendance allowance. We have also made available several VAT zero rates for the purchase of certain equipment and appliances designed solely for use by a disabled person, such as the VAT zero rate for the leasing of vehicles through the Motability scheme.
Let's head up to Lincolnshire with Leah Nietzsche. Leah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for the Minister's reply. I've been contacted by a constituent who is visually impaired and needs expensive corrective glasses annually, on which she has to pay VAT. Does the Minister agree with me that it's not fair that the greater a person's sight disability, the greater their tax is paid? And will she agree to discuss with the Treasury that, as glasses are an essential item for my constituent, that they should not be taxed as a luxury?
My honourable friend raises an important point. The government ensures that the supply of health and welfare services, including opticians and eye tests, are exempt from VAT. This ensures that VAT is not a barrier to accessing medical treatment. Moreover, in addition to the NHS complex lens vouchers, the government already offers support for individuals to help with the cost of glasses through NHS optical vouchers. Those eligible for help include children and those on certain income-related benefits, and the value varies from £39 to £215, depending on the level of the patient's prescriptions. However, I will write to my honourable friend with full details so that she can assist her constituent.
We have a substantive question to Minister Quince.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleagues and I at the DWP have frequent discussions with GEO ministers on a wide range of issues. Throughout this pandemic, this government has sought to protect jobs and incomes, spending billions on strengthening welfare support for those most in need. Our long-term ambition is to level up across the United Kingdom, helping people back into work as quickly as possible, based on the clear evidence around the importance of work in tackling poverty.
Let's go to Greater Manchester with Andrew Gwynn. Andrew.
Thank you. Child poverty is a stain on our nation and something I believe members from across the House should commit and work together to eradicate. The Minister will know that before the pandemic, child poverty was projected to increase to 5.2 million by 2022, a disastrous thing for those children and something that will significantly damage life opportunities. So what steps is he taking now to do everything possible to ensure this prediction does not come true?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. And as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Speaker, one child in poverty is one child too many. All evidence suggests that work is the best route out of poverty for families. And that is why we are supporting parents into work with our £30 billion plan for jobs and childcare offer. But we recognise that times are tough for so many at the moment, which is why we have boosted our welfare system by over £7 billion this year to support those facing the most financial disruption.
Jessica Moore.
Mr. Speaker, can I draw the Minister's attention to research by the Welsh gender equality charity Warateg, which shows that women are twice as likely to be key workers in Wales, that the effect of sector shutdowns, business closures and unemployment are falling disproportionately on women who are more likely to lose their jobs in the pandemic. Will the Minister study the report and will the Minister tell the House what practical steps the government is taking to help them?
Lady for her question. The female employment rate is at 72% and the female unemployment rate is at 4.7%. This is an issue we take incredibly seriously, not least the Minister for Employment, who leads on this important work. I will, of course, study the report she references carefully, as will the Minister for Employment.
We now come to topicals. I will call Secretary Liz Truss to make a statement on her responsibilities. Then I will call Karen McCarthy to ask a supplementary. Secretary Truss.
Tomorrow is International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And as we build back better, we want to see a new generation of female tech and science entrepreneurs. Promoting STEM subjects amongst girls is vital to this. And since 2010, 31% more girls and 34% more women are studying these subjects at A-level and university respectively. And we're building on that programme with STEM ambassadors to encourage even more girls and women to come forward.
The South West with Karen McCarthy. Karen McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many disabled people are still in receipt of legacy benefits and their carers too, which means they're not getting the £20 uplift that universal credit claimants have been getting. Does the Minister agree that this is discriminatory and needs to be addressed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and I appreciate that many people are facing financial disruption due to the pandemic, and this is why the government has put an unprecedented package of support in place. Legacy benefits were increased by 1.7% last year and will increase by 0.5% from April, in line with prices.
Let's head to Rushcliffe with Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend for all her hard work to combat violence against women and girls? And will she join me in encouraging everybody who's experienced violence or supported those who have to submit their views to the government's consultation on the next Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, which closes next week on the 19th of February?
Minister Atkins. Minister Atkins.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my honourable friend for promoting the government's call for evidence on tackling violence against women and girls. We are asking the public, victims, charities, employers, health professionals, universities, colleges, the armed forces, the NHS, and many more for their views so that we can develop a national strategy that is fit for the 2020s. This is the largest ever call for evidence on crimes that disproportionately affect women and girls, because we want to hear from all parts of society. And Mr. Speaker, I ask all honourable members to play their part and encourage their constituents to contribute to this vital call for evidence before it closes on the 19th of February.
We now have the Shadow Secretary, Marcia de Cordova. Marcia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. South Asians, in particular Bangladeshi and Pakistani people, are still experiencing 3 times the risk from coronavirus in this second wave. Therefore, take-up of the vaccine is vital. We know that historical issues of mistrust and culturally inappropriate public health information has contributed to the legitimate vaccine hesitancy. The government has had time to plan to mitigate for this, but has still not produced a clear strategy to engage with our Black, Asian and ethnic minority communities. Can I ask the Minister what steps she has taken to ensure vaccine rollout reaches all our communities, particularly those who are unequally impacted?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will be providing a second COVID disparities report at the end of this month, which will provide more comprehensive detail of steps that we have taken. However, this is an issue that we recognise is very serious. The disparities are changing for different groups. We have seen some progress, for instance, amongst Black groups. However, we do emphasise that vaccines are the best way to protect people from coronavirus. The Department of Health and the NHS are working closely with Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities to support those receiving a vaccine and help anyone who may have questions about the process. As part of this, we're working with faith and community leaders to give them advice and information about the universal benefits of vaccination and how their communities can get a vaccine.
Now the second question from Marcia Cordell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has failed to consider the impact on equalities resulting from its responses to the pandemic. COVID mortality rates are twice as high in deprived areas, and the lowest paid are more than twice as likely to have lost their jobs. This is why the government has a legal duty, as set out in the Equality Act, to consider the effects of policies on inequality, whether ministers would agree or not. As the Minister for Women and Equality has yet to reply to my letter dated on the 14th of January, can she now say that she will work to ensure all government departments undertake and publish equality impact assessments on all its responses to this pandemic?
Mr. Speaker, I completely reject the Honourable Lady's assertions. We do have a strategy, and one part of that strategy is to ensure that ethnic minorities are not stigmatised. The issues around coronavirus are complex. We have released information in various reports that show what the risk factors are, and we have also outlined a plan to address them.
We have the final question from Mark Menzies up in Lancashire. Mark Menzies.
Mr. Speaker, there is growing concern that an increasing number of women are becoming victims of online gambling addiction, with resulting financial and mental health issues. What steps is the government taking to truly understand the scale of the problem and to safeguard women from predatory recruitment tactics?
Mr. Speaker, rates of problem gambling amongst women do remain very low, but we know how devastating its impacts can be. The Gambling Commission is looking at the way it collects data on gambling participation and problem gambling to make sure we have access to even more robust and regular data on the issue. The government is also reviewing the Gambling Act to make sure we have the right protections in place to make gambling safer for all.
Right, thank you for that. We're now coming to Prime Minister's questions, where I'm going to be calling... Prime Minister, come on, let's be having you. Gurry Sambrook's waiting. Gurry Sambrook.
For one, sir.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Gurry Sambrook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last week, thousands of people across Frankly Great Park and South Northfield have done what's been asked of them to go and get a test because of a small number of South African variant cases in the constituency. Would the Prime Minister join me in thanking Dr Justin Varney and Councillor Simon Morrell and Birmingham City Council for everything they've done to be able to scale up mass testing across Frankly Great Park and encourage anyone who hasn't had a test so far to get one at one of the designated sites?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for raising it, and I join him in thanking the NHS staff who are scaling up testing, the surge testing in the way that he describes, and I encourage everybody in the area, and indeed throughout the country, to get a vaccine when you're asked to do so.
Let's come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, can I begin by thanking everybody involved in the vaccine rollout. We've now vaccinated, I think, 12.6 million people. We're on course to vaccinate the first 4 priority groups by the end of this week. That's a truly amazing achievement. Can the Prime Minister confirm today that the government will extend business rate relief beyond March 31st?
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to hear him join in praise of the vaccine rollout, which is indeed, I think, a tribute to the NHS staff and the Army, the volunteers, and many others. And on his point about the extension of business rate relief, he knows that this government is committed to supporting businesses and people, livelihoods throughout the pandemic. That is what we will continue to do, but he should wait until the budget for the Chancellor to explain exactly what we're going to do.
Mr. Speaker, I think that answer was that the Prime Minister can't give an answer yet. But hundreds of thousands of businesses are affected by this. And the trouble is, Mr. Speaker, that businesses don't work as slowly as the Prime Minister. They need an answer now. As the British Chamber of Commerce says, businesses simply can't wait until the March budget. Let me try another vitally important question for businesses and for millions of working people. Can the Prime Minister confirm today that the furlough scheme will be extended beyond April?
Mr. Speaker, I think most people in this country are aware that we're going through a very serious pandemic in which rates of infection have been steadily brought down thanks to the efforts of the rich people. I think also members of this House are familiar with the notion that in just a few days we will be setting out a roadmap for the way out of this pandemic, a roadmap that I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman and his colleagues will support. Though the support, as we know, tends to be a transitory thing, Mr. Speaker. One week we have it, the next week we don't. But he won't have to contain himself for very long.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, let me let the Prime Minister into a secret. He can take decisions for himself. and he doesn't need to leave everything to the 11th minute. If I were Prime Minister, I'd say to businesses, we'll support you now, we'll protect jobs now. Because the CBI, the Federation of Small Businesses, the Institute of Directors and the British Chamber of Commerce have all said the same thing. They all say, Prime Minister, they can't wait until the budget. The Prime Minister may disagree with me, but he's actually disagreeing with businesses. Why does the Prime Minister think he knows better than British business?
Mr. Speaker, I think that most business people that I've talked to a great many in the last 12 months, would agree that there is no government around the world that has done more to support business, wrapping our arms around business. And actually, I'm delighted to hear this enthusiasm for business from the Labour Party when they stood on a manifesto to destroy capitalism at the last election, and indeed to dismantle the very pharmaceutical industry, Mr. Speaker, that has provided the vaccines on which we now rely. Will he now repudiate that policy, Mr. Speaker?
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, we all know what the Prime Minister once said he wanted to do to business. We on these benches would rather listen to businesses. So we've no decision on business rates, no decision on furlough. Let's try another crucial issue. And Prime Minister, no excuse for delaying this time, because this has to be decided before the March budget, and the Prime Minister doesn't need to check with the Chancellor. So will the Prime Minister now commit to extending the evictions ban on residential properties beyond February the 21st?
Mr. Speaker, I've said repeatedly that what we will do in this government and throughout this pandemic is put our arms around the British people, support them throughout the pandemic, and make sure that people are not unfairly evicted during the pandemic. That is what we will do. What I hope very much, Mr. Speaker, is that we may hear from the right honourable gentleman opposite that he not only has now had a Damascene conversion to the importance of business, but a Damascene conversion to supporting all the government's policies to support business, rather than sniping from the sidelines. Why doesn't he just get behind us and back the government, back us in our efforts to back business and back the British people?
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take lectures from a man who wrote 2 versions of every column he ever wrote as a journalist, who proposed Donald Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize and gave Dominic Cummings a pay rise. Back to the question. Another area where the Prime Minister repeatedly delayed and now changes policy pretty well every day is securing our borders against variants of COVID. Every week the Prime Minister comes here and says we've got one of the toughest regimes in the world. We know his Home Secretary disagrees with him. We know the Health Secretary disagrees with him. Luckily, Mr. Speaker, Oxford University keep track of how tough border restrictions are in every country. They say that there are at least 33 countries around the world which currently have tougher restrictions for the United Kingdom. 33, Prime Minister, including Canada, Denmark, Japan, Israel. There are many others. In fact, they say we're not even in the top bracket of countries for border restrictions. 50 days after we first discovered the South African variant, 50 days. How does the Prime Minister explain that?
Mr. Speaker, there are some countries in Europe that do not even have a hotel quarantine scheme such as the one we're putting in on Monday. We have amongst the toughest border regimes anywhere in the world. And people should understand that on a normal day, Mr. Speaker, at this time of year, you could expect about 250,000 people to be arriving in this country. We've got it down to about 20,000, 5,000 of them whom are involved in bringing vital things into this country, such as medicines and food, as we discussed last week, and he agreed that was a good idea, Mr. Speaker. Unless he actually wants to cut this country off from the rest of the world, which I think last week he said he didn't want to do, unless, of course, he's changed his mind again, Mr. Speaker. I think that this policy is measured, it is proportionate, it is getting tougher from Monday. I hope that he supports it.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is this. The Prime Minister is failing to give security to British businesses, and he's failing to secure our borders. The Prime Minister often complains that we never put forward constructive proposals. So here's 2 for him. Support businesses and protect jobs now by extending furlough, business rate relief and VAT cuts for hospitality. And second, secure our borders with a comprehensive hotel quarantine on arrival. No more delays. Will he do it?
Mr. Speaker, we've just announced the quarantine policy, which, as I've said to the House, is amongst the toughest in the world, and tougher than most other European countries, certainly. I'm delighted that he's now supporting business in his latest stunt of bandwagoneering, not a policy for which he was famous before, Mr. Speaker. But he moves from one side of the other in the debate throughout this crisis. And some people, Mr. Speaker, some people have said that this is a good crisis, Mr. Speaker. Some people have said this is a good crisis. Some people have said that this crisis is a gift that keeps on giving, Mr. Crisis. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, those people sit on the Labour front bench. I think it is disgraceful that they should say those things. I believe this is one of the biggest challenges this country has faced since the Second World War. And thanks to one of the fastest vaccine rollouts anywhere in the world, I believe it is a challenge this country can meet and is meeting. And I believe that of that vaccine rollout programme, this House and this country should be very proud.
Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for the decisions he took last year that have meant that the vaccine programme is in such a good position this week. Despite that success, it is vital that that programme keeps pace with the changing variants. Can he update the House on where the UK stands on ensuring that the UK supply chain is in place and that we don't get behind as the virus mutates?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend asks an extremely important question, and that's why we recently announced an agreement for 50 million doses with the manufacturer CureVac, because we believe that that may help us to develop vaccines that can respond at scale to new variants of the virus. And as the House will have heard from the Chief Medical Officer and the Deputy Chief Medical Officer and others, I think we're going to have to get used to the idea of vaccinating and then revaccinating in the autumn as we come to face these new variants.
Let's head up to Skye and Lochaber with SNP leader Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. New research from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and the baby bank charity Little Village has revealed that 1.3 million children under 5 are living in poverty in the United Kingdom. This is a truly shocking figure that should make this Tory government utterly ashamed. The Scottish National Party has repeatedly called for a financial package to boost household incomes and reverse this Tory child poverty crisis. The Prime Minister has the power to tackle child poverty right now by making the £20 uplift to universal credit permanent and by extending it to legacy benefits. The Tory government's been stalling on this for months. Will the Prime Minister finally act, or will he leave millions of children out in the cold?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the whole House in this country should be proud of the way we've tried to look after people, the poorest and neediest families throughout the country, not just with universal credit, which the party opposite would actually abolish, Mr. Speaker, but by helping vulnerable people with their food and their heating bills, the £170 million winter grant scheme, looking after people with the free school meal vouchers. And as I've said before, Mr. Speaker, we will put our arms around the people of this entire country throughout the pandemic.
Let's return to Scotland with Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that was pathetic. That was no answer. We're talking about 1.3 million children under 5 in poverty. Let me quote, "She cried on her doorstep because I gave her nappies, wipes and winter clothes for her child. I went away with a lump in my throat." These are the words of Emily, a baby bank worker who's supporting families that the Tories have pushed into poverty through a decade of cuts. They don't need more empty words from a Prime Minister who simply doesn't care enough to act. Mr. Speaker, this morning a new report from Citizen Advice Scotland warned that Tory cuts could reduce the value of universal credit by as much as a quarter just when people need this money the most. Will the Prime Minister agree to meet with me and other opposition parties ahead of the budget for an urgent summit on tackling child poverty, or will he be yet another Tory Prime Minister who leaves a generation of children languishing in poverty?
Mr. Speaker, I must say that I reject entirely what the right honourable gentleman has just said, because I don't believe that any government could have done more to help the people of this country throughout this pandemic, and we will continue to do so. And yes, of course, we bitterly lament and reject the poverty that some families unquestionably suffer, and it is tragic that too many families have had a very, very tough time during this pandemic. But we will continue to support them in all the ways that we have set up. And I may say to the right honourable gentleman, there is a profound philosophical difference between him and me, because the Scottish Nationalist Party is morphing into ever more a left-wing party that believes fundamentally. There you go, Mr. Speaker. That believes fundamentally that it is the duty of the taxpayer to pay for more and more and more. We want to get people into jobs, Mr. Speaker, and it is in that respect that the Scottish Nationalist Party is, I'm afraid, failing their...
Well, Prime Minister, we both know that you're only teasing him and we're trying to wind up the leader of the SNP. Please, let's drop it. Let's move on, because Lee Anderson is waiting for you. Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A new Freeport for the East Midlands will create over 60,000 new jobs and provide a massive boost for employers such as Cornton Engineering and Abacus in Ashfield. After decades of neglect from Labour MPs, we now feel a sense of hope in the red wall seats. My mum and dad voted Conservative for the first time at the last general election and were touched when the Prime Minister acknowledged their votes were lent. Could my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, please reassure my mum and dad, my friend, my family and all my constituents that our area will never be let down again?
Prime Minister.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for everything he's doing for Ashfield, and he and I have had enjoyable times campaigning for the people of Ashfield, and we'll continue to do so. And I can tell Paul and Jenny that our commitment to levelling up is absolutely rock solid throughout this country.
I said to marry on it with Liz Saville-Roberts. Liz Saville-Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Lefarydd. We've just heard the government claims to have a levelling up agenda, underpinned by a research and development roadmap. The trouble is, the Tories' track record on this isn't good. In fact, it's abysmal. Wales receives the lowest R&D spend per person of the four nations, at around 40% of spend per head in England. And Westminster's obsession with the golden triangle of Oxford, Cambridge and London shows no sign of abating. Will he now commit to a fairer, devolved R&D funding settlement to the Senedd? Or is he content for Westminster's roadmap to be Wales's road to nowhere?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid I think she's doing Wales down, and the people of Wales down, and the ingenuity of Wales down, because I think about a quarter of the airline passengers in the world are borne aloft on wings made by the Welsh aerospace sector, Mr. Speaker. Bridgend is going to be one of the great centres of battery manufacturing in this country, if not the world. Wales is at the cutting edge of technology under this government's plans for a record spending on R&D, £22 billion by the end of this Parliament. Wales, along with the whole of the rest of the UK, will benefit massively.
I said to Cheshire with Dr. Keir Mullen. Dr. Keir Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK has fallen behind Europe in untapping the potential of geothermal heat and energy in places like Crewe. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how we can ensure geothermal better with a...
I thank my honourable friend for the excellent point he makes about Crewe and the way it's of deep geothermal energy exploration, and very happy to what we can do to further geothermal energy in Crewe, diary permitting, Mr. Speaker.
Let's wander up to Bolton with Yasmin Qureshi. Yasmin.
Mr. Speaker, this government said that no council would be suffering as a result of the pandemic. And the Chancellor said that he would do everything, whatever it takes to help them. Yet the Tory-controlled Bolton Council has just announced 35 million cuts in pounds and an increase in the council tax budget for 3.8%. Can the Prime Minister assure my constituents and my town that that money will be given to them, or will this join a long list of Tory failed promises?
Minister.
I want to congratulate, Mr. Speaker, the great Conservative-controlled Council of Bolton for everything they're doing and continue to do throughout this pandemic to look after the people of Bolton. I know what incredible work local officials do, and I thank them very much for it. And we believe, since we believe so strongly in local government, Mr. Speaker, as a creature of local government myself, I'm proud that we've invested £4.6 billion in supporting local government just so far in this pandemic.
Sajid Javid.
Mr. Speaker, from rainforests to coral reefs, the world's ecosystems are at risk of catastrophic decline. That was the conclusion of the Dasgupta review last week, which my right honourable friend rightly welcomed. This threat to our biodiversity is not just a moral failure, it is economically short-sighted too. When I asked Professor Dasgupta to carry out this work, he told me that it would not be complete until after the UK had hosted the COP26 summit. But now, given that the summit has been delayed until later this year, and that it will take place alongside our presidency of the G7, does my right honourable friend agree with me that the UK has been presented with a unique opportunity to show global leadership on how we can better protect our most precious asset, nature?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. And I thank him for what he's doing himself in this area. And I want the House to know that we want our COP, the UN COP26 summit, to be a landmark event, not just for tackling climate change, but also in biodiversity. And I think it's high time that the leaders of the world took a step to reverse the loss of habitats and species that we've seen over the last century.
Let's head up to Oxfordshire with Layla Moran. Layla Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's estimated that up to 400,000 people are living with the debilitating effects of long COVID, and some of these are NHS heroes who caught COVID in that first wave. Nearly a year later, I've heard from a doctor who says she wonders if she'll ever be able to walk unaided again, let alone manage a full day of work. Does the Prime Minister recognise that for this group, long COVID is an occupational disease? And will he set up a compensation scheme similar to what we offer our armed forces, so that we ensure that those who have lost their livelihoods by saving lives are fully supported?
Thank the Honourable Lady, because she's right to highlight the incredible sacrifice and effort of NHS staff, many of whom sadly have contracted COVID in the course of their duties, and a great many of whom have sadly continued to be affected by that disease. We must study the long-term effects of COVID and make sure that we continue to look after our wonderful NHS staff throughout their careers.
To Yorkshire with Julian Sturdy. Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister confirm today that all students will be back in school no later than the 8th of March and commit to starting any phased return straight after half term, so that the really damaging effects of being away from school are not drawn out for any longer than is absolutely necessary?
Mr. Speaker, I can certainly confirm that we're going to do everything we can, and I know that that's the settled will of most people in this House, to get our kids, get school children back on March the 8th, if we possibly can. I'll be setting out for my honourable friend as much as we can say on Monday, and then in the week of the 22nd, we'll be setting out a roadmap and setting out the way forward for schools. But we've got to make sure we keep this virus under control, Mr. Speaker. It is coming down, but we cannot take our foot off its throat.
Let's head up to the northeast with Ian Mearns. Ian Mearns.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Having sat on the HS2 Hybrid Bill Committee for 15 months, I was a sceptic as to the economic benefits of the project for the northeast. But HS2 is going ahead, at least in the south. It's therefore crucial that the eastern leg of HS2 goes ahead, not just for Yorkshire and the East Midlands, but also for the northeast. The Prime Minister has made repeated promises to the people of the northeast of his intention to level up and to connect and create opportunities for people here in places like Gateshead. So As we strive to recover from the damage done to so many families and businesses by the pandemic, will the Prime Minister commit to beginning the work on the eastern leg of HS2, starting in the northeast, to run simultaneously with the construction in the south, so that our region is not forced to wait another couple of decades for 21st century rail connectivity?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can certainly confirm that we are going to develop the eastern leg as well as the whole of HS2, and he'll be hearing a lot more about what we're going to do with our national infrastructure revolution, Mr. Speaker, and about what we're going to do to improve not just rail transport, but road transport as well in the northeast.
Let's head south to Caroline Nance, lose audio only. Caroline Nance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is no shortage of commitment or compassion in my town of Eastbourne for homeless people who are vulnerable and need complex support. However, neighbouring Brighton continues to send its homeless to our town, and we do not have the resources to meet this need. 3 homeless people have died, and I believe there will be inquests. Brighton is not engaging with Eastbourne's council in any meaningful way, and a further 51 placements have been made in recent weeks. Will my right honourable friend join with me in urging immediate engagement from Brighton and Hove council leaders on this as a matter of urgency?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I thank Brighton Council and for cooperating with Eastbourne Council in getting this done. There must be cooperation. No one in this country should be living rough or sleeping or homeless, sleeping rough or being homeless as a result of this pandemic, or indeed through any other cause, Mr. Speaker. We've invested 700 million this year to help people off the streets. It continues to be a national priority, and I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, for what he's doing and the various task forces that are currently at work to prevent people coming out on the streets again as we lift the restrictions.
Let's head to South Wales with Geraint Davis. Geraint.
Mr. Speaker, at DVLA in Swansea, there had been 526 cases of coronavirus since last September, when the Prime Minister told us, at Prime Minister's Question Time, all staff who can work from home are working from home. Yet in March last year, 250 people were working on site. Now the numbers are in their thousands, facing a more infectious and widespread disease. And yesterday, 90 people were sent home following the latest outbreak of coronavirus just before the weekend. So given that BT are on standby to install home secure technology to allow home working, will the Prime Minister meet with me and the union PCS ahead of the strike ballot next week so that workplace numbers can be reduced until the vaccine is rolled out to keep people safe and to avoid an unnecessary strike?
Mr. Speaker, I thank him for raising this again with me, and thanks to the working from home strategy that DVLA has been pursuing of a workforce of 6,000. There are currently thankfully, 9 cases, to the best of my knowledge, of COVID, and 3 of those individuals are currently working from home. We're rolling out lateral flow tests. A huge number of lateral flow tests are being distributed to the DVLA. But the long-term solution, Mr. Speaker, or the medium-term solution, I should say, is to vaccinate and to roll out the vaccination programme. And that is what this government is doing in Wales and across the country.
Let's head to the West Midlands with Nicola Richards. Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Families across West Bromwich East have been affected by cancer, just like my own, and know all too well that early diagnosis and treatment can save a life. According to research by Macmillan Cancer Support, there were over 70 people in my constituency and 50,000 across the UK with a missing cancer diagnosis. Cancer hasn't stopped during the pandemic, so with this in mind, will the Prime Minister commit to making the resurgence of cancer diagnosis services a top priority as restrictions begin to ease?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and I know this is an issue that is very close to her heart, and she's right to raise it, because we, of course, there are the pressures from COVID, but we're also worried, Mr. Speaker, that some people may not be coming forward for the cancer treatments that they need. So I'd urge everybody who needs to get their treatment to help the NHS to help you come forward and get your treatment as you normally would.
To the North West with Lucy Powell. Lucy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said in November that the £1.5 billion Green Homes grant would be extended to March 2022. Yet in a written answer last week, his minister said that the money would not be carried over from this financial year to next. With just 7 weeks to go, a paltry £71 million has been spent so far. So why is he cutting £1 billion from the Green Homes grant that he promised for businesses, homeowners and the environment?
She's on to something, but she's barking up the wrong tree, Mr. Speaker. The problem with the Green Homes grant is not that we're not cutting it. The problem is there hasn't been enough take up, and we want to encourage people to take it up and make use of the opportunity to reduce the carbon emission of your homes.
Let's head south to Sir Roger Gale. Sir Roger.
The Prime Minister has said, and he's written in his foreword to the Environment White Paper, that he's pledged to protect the countryside. Mr. Speaker, the countryside is more than just a bit of green belt around the home counties. In Westgate and Birchington and Herne Bay, in my own constituency, and indeed across much of the Garden of England, there are plans to smother acres of prime agricultural land in housing that is not needed for local people, but that is needed and required to grow the crops to reduce the amount of food that we import at a cost of carbon emissions. So if the Prime Minister is the friend of the countryside, will he announce an immediate moratorium on the use of all farmland for housing while the whole policy is reviewed?
Mr. Speaker, I think I just heard the honourable gentleman say that he wants an immediate moratorium on the construction of all housing. Maybe I misunderstood. I don't think that to be realistic. But what I can certainly tell him is that we will take very seriously the points he makes. I know that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, has met him and will be glad to meet him again to discuss the subject he raises. But this government's commitment to nature and to the countryside is unmatched. We've just consecrated 30% of our land surface, Mr. Speaker, to nature.
Let's head up to Airdrie with Neil Gray. Neil Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had a meeting recently with the PCS about public sector pay and heard from constituents in Shotts and Calderbank who work for UK government departments. Both are struggling to cover over a real terms pay cut over decades. One has had to take partial early retirement so the lump sum could keep him going. What will the Prime Minister say to the Chancellor to convince him of the need to properly reward all those who have been on the front line during the COVID pandemic and at the very least follow the Scottish Government's lead in fully funding a rise in public sector pay?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have seen above inflation increases in public sector pay, and that is quite right. And we support particularly increases in investment in our NHS, and you'll know the package that we put in place for nurses. But the single best thing that we can do is support the living wage, which this government introduced, and which this government introduced, and which we have now increased by record amounts 2 years in a row. And I see the Scottish Nationalist Party, forgive me, Mr. Speaker, the National, I don't know whether they're nationalists or not, perhaps they could clear it up, whether they think, maybe, are they...
It's up earlier for you.
Are they a national party without being nationalists? It's an interesting semantic point, Mr. Speaker. I think they're trying to claim that they pioneered the living wage. I don't think that's right, Mr. Speaker. I seem to remember that it was a certain mayoralty in London that massively increased the living wage when they weren't off the starting blocks, Mr. Speaker.
In which case, let's go down to Somerset, who is ready on the starting blocks with Ian Littlegranger.
Mr. Speaker, thank you as always. I am delighted my honourable friend is defending democracy by pushing ahead with local elections. But here in the land of King Alfred, the people desperately want to give their verdict on Somerset County Council, which I'm afraid has been using COVID money to spend on things that have nothing to do with the pandemic. They have submitted to the government a form which says that nothing, and I fear that my right honourable friend has been misled. We need a referendum down here to test public opinion quickly. But would my right honourable friend, a proud man of Somerset, who understands history more than most of us, not agree the time has come to put our county back together and that we have the whole of Somerset being looked after by Somerset? I know King Alfred would approve of it, and I know the people of Somerset will certainly support the Prime Minister if he supports us.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend, who is a great advocate of Somerset and committed to his constituents, and I thank him for what he's doing. He's raised this now twice with me, and I thank him for that. But my humbly suggests that the best way forward is for the consultation to proceed and for local people to decide what the best form of government, local government, is that they want.
Let's head for our final question from Northern Ireland with Gregory Campbell. Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, you're aware now of the problems we warned about over many months before the Northern Ireland Protocol was introduced. These problems are scheduled to get worse from April. Can you outline a timeline where people in Northern Ireland, and indeed all across the UK, as indicated in the e-Parliament petition last week, when all of us can enjoy free trade across the nation, including from GB to NI, as every other independent trading nation enjoys?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I've made it absolutely clear to our EU friends and partners that we want to make our relationship work, but it is also absolutely essential that there should be untrammelled free trade exchange of goods, people, services and capital through all parts of the UK, and we will do everything we can to ensure that that is the case, including, as I've said in the chamber before and to his honourable colleagues, including invoking Article 16 of the Protocol if that is necessary.
I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable the necessary arrangements for the next business to be made. Order. Ready? Liz, are you ready? OK. I now call the Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick, to make a statement. Secretary of State.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I want to make a statement on housing and building safety. Beyond the COVID-19 pandemic,